I don't like a lot of what people write about pros. I know there's been a lot of discussion about what should be allowed with regard to, the proper role of social media in the league ecosystem and the league economy and mainstream sports versus esports and people's rights as fans and what they should and shouldn't be allowed to say and what's um, all that. I'm not really interested in all that. At least for this video. I just want to say that I just don't like the tone of what people write, and I'm not trying to make rules for everyone here about what should be allowed and what shouldn't be allowed. I just want to say I don't like it, and I found something to describe, I think, very well why I don't like it. So the first point isn't really mine. It's from Professor Callard, who's a philosopher. Cynicism is often mistaken for honesty, but is not. So I think the leak sub is very disposed to cynicism. There's a lot of approval of negative comments. And I think, again, from Professor Callard, cynicism compared to like positivity, negativity is just a lot easier to like pass off as honesty. Where like being overly positive would seem naive. It's very easy to say, I'm not being negative, I'm being, brutally honest or speaking a harsh truth or something like that. Um, and so in reality, it's a way of being dishonest, but again, it's just easier to pass off this sort of negativity as honesty than it is to pass off something positive as honesty. The second thing I don't like is the sort of sneering tone comments take, even if people don't think they're being totally serious in taking that tone. And I haven't taken the time to like go through and analyze tons of comments to prove that there are lots of comments with a sneering tone or something, although that might be interesting. But I mean, I think you can just take it on faith that there are a lot of comments like stuff, I don't know, cashing in a paycheck, washed up, and so on. And even if people are only like pretending to take this attitude in a comment just to be funny or make just a clever quip or something, I think it's a sort of cowardly and unhealthy thing to do. And part of the reason I don't like this is people diminishing what they've never even considered attempting themselves. It's just, stuff like NA is such a bad region and you have an obligation to me as a fan to make me proud because you're a pro, blah, blah, blah. Like, buddy, has it ever occurred to you that like you live in North America and you have a computer, like presumably because you're here, you can play League. Like you could actually, try and represent North America too. Like the pros might try and fail, but you haven't even thought about trying and what it would take. I think one reason for this might be that implicitly in flaming pros, people take a sense of aloofness over them, which might be compensation for how bad people really are, or how little they really matter to the league scene. So like a way of making them feel sort of like bigger, and a way of being like, ha, I'm only plat, but or silver, whatever. Like I spotted that mistake that the pro made. As a spectator, I saw that. Like, haha, he flashed in and died. But really, I think a sort of central problem is that pros don't get credit for putting in effort. Again, like the pro tried, you didn't, at least the pro tried really hard. And I think pros do work really hard, which people don't give them credit for. But I don't think any pro just, got to where they are by playing Fortnite 12 hours a day or whatever. I think that might be something people tell themselves that, oh, they just happen to be talented or get lucky or get a good team or something. But in reality, every pro, even the worst pro in the LCS, whoever you think that is, um, still worked really hard and put in a lot of effort to be really, really good, like insanely good in ways you don't even understand at their role. Anyways, I want to address some possible reactions. So, am I being too soft, too thin-skinned? Am I just handing out participation trophies? You get a gold star for trying. Am I condoning failure and dooming the region in doing so? So the first point is that people sometimes say pros should be thick-skinned, as if it follows from that insulting them is okay. And I think it's sort of insidious because it's literally true that pros in the current state of affairs can and should be thick-skinned, but they sort of gloss over the more interesting part, which is if it does or does not follow from that insulting them is okay. And I don't necessarily think it does, because there's a cost to being thick-skinned, which I think Thorin has pointed out is that for people who play video games for a living and are just on the internet all the time, it's really difficult to say, okay, you know what, you can't really use the internet and you can't really see what people think of you. The second thing I want to address is that if anyone, like a pro or someone else tries to defend a pro, they're just written off as like soft. And this quote is from Teddy Roosevelt, by the way, who was not perfect with many things, but if he had flaws, soft was not one of them. This was from Citizenship in a Republic, which was basically Teddy Roosevelt going over the fucking Sorbonne and like an institution of learning centuries older than his entire country, and basically saying like intellectuals can get soft and the most important virtue is like hard, strenuous work in the real world, and overall just like let me, like from this relatively young sort of upstart country, lecture you about what being a good citizen means. So like this was not a guy who was afraid to speak his mind. So the most famous part of the speech this is an excerpt from is the man in the arena bit, which seemed relevant, but I actually don't think he's against criticism exactly, even though, it is the man in the arena who counts and not the critic. The even easier and probably most contemptible person is the one who sneers at both the critic and the performer, which poses a potential problem because maybe that's what I'm doing, right? Sneering at critics. And as a similar question to address from the League community, if we can't criticize pros, then what can the community even do? Like just, fill post-match threads with like good game well played and say nothing? Because that would be very boring. I think the answer is the distinction between sneering and criticism, which I think Teddy Roosevelt implicitly makes because he's making this speech about how criticism is better than sneering. So I would assume he takes himself to be offering criticism rather than just sneering. And I think the difference for him is that good criticism takes like effort, it takes action, it takes putting yourself into it. And so I think I'm criticizing sneerers rather than sneering at critics. And when I think of the sort of comment that I'm thinking of as sneering, it's very low effort, nothing is intended to come of it, it's sort of anonymous. I think these comments are sneering rather than criticism. And so in this video, I've tried to use other words than criticism to describe the sort of comment I don't like, what the sort of sneering and why I think it's bad I've already gone over. But I think it would also be worth talking about what a sort of good criticism would look like. So I think here the highest virtue is action, and criticizing will never match actually doing something hard. But maybe it has value to the extent that criticism is itself hard to make, or at least good criticism. So a good criticism would probably be one that's like not easy to spot and something you have to really like put yourself out there to actually make.